The blinding flash of red and blue lights in the rearview mirror is a universal trigger for anxiety. But on a deserted, rain-slicked highway at 2 a.m, it can be a death sentence. When an unmarked sedan was pulled over by 2 officers eager to flex their authority, they thought they had an easy target. A man driving alone, the wrong color, in the wrong neighborhood. They dragged him out, bruised his ribs, and mocked his silence. But they made one catastrophic mistake. The man bleeding on the asphalt wasn't a suspect. He was their new commanding officer. Captain Levi Harrison was a man who believed in the slow, grinding machinery of justice. At 48 years old, he had spent over 2 decades navigating the labyrinthine politics of the state police force, earning a reputation as a fixer. He was the man top brass sent in when a precinct was rotting from the inside out. He had a chest full of commendations, a law degree he earned taking night classes, and a quiet, unshakable demeanor that unnerved corrupt cops more than any screaming internal affairs investigator ever could. His latest assignment was the 42nd Precinct, a notorious district bordering the industrial sector of Oak Haven. The 42nd was a relic of a bygone era of policing, a boys' club steeped in legacy, unrecorded complaints, and casual brutality. The previous commander had been quietly forced into early retirement after a series of explosive use-of-force lawsuits. Levi had been handpicked by Deputy Chief Robert Callahan to clean house. It was a Tuesday night, pouring rain, and Levi was officially off duty. He was driving his personal vehicle, a meticulously maintained 2014 Ford Taurus that looked like 1,000 other cars on the road. He wore a faded grey hooded sweatshirt, dark denim jeans, and a pair of worn-in work boots. He was tired. He had spent the last 14 hours moving boxes into his new apartment on the outskirts of the district, preparing for his first official roll call the following morning. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2:14 a.m. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof of the Taurus. Levi had the radio turned down low to a jazz station, letting the smooth saxophone cut through the tension in his shoulders. He was doing exactly 55 miles per hour in a 65 zone, keeping to the middle lane on the deserted Interstate 9. Then, the darkness in his rearview mirror was shattered by a strobe of harsh red and blue. Levi sighed, his hands automatically shifting to the 10-2 position on the steering wheel. He glanced at his speedometer. 55. His tags were up to date, his tail lights were fully functional, and he hadn't drifted a millimeter outside his lane. A cold, familiar knot tightened in his stomach. He knew the statistics. He knew the reality of driving while black in certain zip codes, even when you were the one holding the highest badge in the district. He signaled, safely navigating the Taurus to the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly over the wet stones. He threw the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his driver's side window. He reached up, turned on the dome light so the cabin was fully illuminated, and placed both hands flat on top of the steering wheel. He was a textbook example of compliance. In his side mirror, he watched the patrol car idle a few car lengths back. The spotlight clicked on, a blinding beam of white light cutting through the rain and washing out his side mirror. 2 figures emerged from the cruiser. Unit 42, Bravo. Officer Bradley Jenkins stepped out of the driver's side. Jenkins was a third-generation cop, a man whose sense of authority was as inflated as his heavily muscled, steroid-thickened chest. He had a thick neck, a buzz cut, and a reputation for treating the residents of the 42nd District like enemy combatants. Flanking him from the passenger side was Officer Thomas Riggs, a rookie with barely 2 years on the job. Riggs was a follower, a nervous young man who had quickly learned that the easiest way to survive in the 42nd was to mimic the aggression of the veterans. Jenkins approached the driver's side window, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon. An intimidation tactic Levi had disciplined his own officers for a dozen times. Rain dripped from the brim of Jenkins' uniform cap. He didn't use a flashlight to illuminate the car. The spotlight from the cruiser was doing that job, casting long, stark shadows across Levi's face. "License and registration," Jenkins demanded. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. The tone was laced with a thick, undeniable contempt. "Good evening, officer," Levi replied, his voice calm, steady, and resonant. "Could you tell me why I was pulled over?" Jenkins leaned in slightly, his jaw tightening. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by a man in a hoodie at 2 a.m. "I didn't ask for a conversation. I said license and registration. Now." "I understand," Levi said, remaining perfectly still, his hands glued to the wheel. "But as a citizen, I'd like to know the probable cause for this stop. Was I speeding? Do I have a tail light out?" Riggs, standing a few feet back, shifted uncomfortably, shining his flashlight into the back seat. "Just do what he says, man," Riggs muttered, his voice cracking slightly with nervous energy. "Listen to me very carefully," Jenkins sneered, leaning his face closer to the open window. The smell of stale coffee and stale tobacco rolled off him. "You were weaving. Failure to maintain a lane. Now, are you going to hand over your paperwork, or are we going to have a problem here tonight?" Levi knew it was a lie. He also knew that arguing the point right now, in the dark, on a deserted highway with a clearly agitated officer, was a dangerous game. But Levi was a man of principle. He decided to test the waters, to see exactly how deep the rot in his new precinct went. "Officer, I've been driving in the center lane at 55 miles per hour for the last 3 miles. I haven't woven once. I'll gladly provide my documents, but my wallet is in my back right pocket, and my registration is in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for them slowly. Is that understood?" Jenkins's eyes narrowed. He took Levi's precise, articulate speech as an insult, a challenge to his absolute dominance of the situation. "Step out of the car," Jenkins ordered, his voice dropping an octave, losing the pretense of a routine traffic stop. "I don't believe you have a lawful reason to order me out of the vehicle for a standard traffic infraction, officer," Levi replied mildly, "especially since I am cooperating with your request for documentation." "I said, step out of the damn car," Jenkins roared, his hand moving to unclip his holster. Levi looked at the younger officer, Riggs. "Officer, your partner is escalating a simple, non-moving violation. I am unarmed. I am complying." Riggs looked at Jenkins, completely out of his depth, before stepping forward, trying to look imposing. "Get out of the car, sir. Lawful order." Levi took a slow, deep breath. The trap was set. They were handing him the rope, and all he had to do was let them tie the knot. "All right," Levi said quietly. "I am stepping out." Levi used his left hand to unbuckle his seatbelt, ensuring the movement was slow and deliberate. He pulled the door handle, kicking the door open into the driving rain. As he placed his left boot onto the wet pavement, the atmosphere instantly shifted from tense to violently volatile. Before Levi could even plant his right foot and stand fully upright, Jenkins lunged. A massive hand grabbed the thick fabric of Levi's hoodie at the collar. With a violent jerk, Jenkins hauled the 48-year-old man out of the driver's seat. Levi stumbled, his boots slipping on the slick, rain-soaked asphalt. He instinctively brought his hands up to catch his balance, not to strike, but Jenkins reacted as if he were facing an armed insurgent. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Jenkins screamed into the night, the volume of his voice intended to create a narrative for his partner, the dash cam, and any potential witnesses, though there were none. Jenkins spun Levi around with terrifying force, slamming him face first against the roof of the Ford Taurus. The impact knocked the wind out of Levi. Cold metal bit into his cheek, and the sudden, jarring shock sent a sharp pain radiating through his ribcage. "I am not resisting," Levi gasped, forcing his hands flat against the roof of the car, splaying his fingers wide. His training as a defensive tactics instructor screamed at him to drop his center of gravity, sweep Jenkins's legs, and neutralize the threat. It would take less than 3 seconds to put the aggressive officer on his back, but Levi locked his muscles into place. He was not a civilian fighting for his life. He was an internal affairs weapon, gathering ammunition. Every bruise, every illegal command, every excessive use of force was a nail in Jenkins' professional coffin. "Put your hands behind your back!" Riggs shouted, rushing in, his flashlight clattering to the ground as he grabbed Levi's left arm, twisting it up painfully high between his shoulder blades. "He's fighting, Riggs! Take him down!" Jenkins yelled, entirely manufacturing the struggle. Jenkins kicked Levi's legs apart with the heavy sole of his boot, aiming a sharp blow to the back of Levi's right knee. Levi's leg buckled, and before he could stabilize, Jenkins put his full body weight against Levi's back, driving him down. The descent was brutal. Levi hit the wet, gritty asphalt hard. Rainwater instantly soaked through his jeans and hoodie. Jenkins dropped his knee with all of his 240 pounds squarely into the center of Levi's spine. A sharp gasp tore from Levi's lips as the pressure threatened to crack his vertebrae. "Stay down, you piece of trash!" Jenkins snarled, his spit mixing with the rain on Levi's neck. Riggs was frantically pulling at Levi's left arm, wrenching the shoulder joint near the point of dislocation. Jenkins grabbed Levi's right wrist, dragging it aggressively behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted around his wrists. Jenkins didn't just secure them, he squeezed the metal cuffs until the ratchets clicked as tight as they could go, the jagged metal instantly biting into the skin, cutting off the circulation to Levi's hands. "Cuffs are too tight," Levi said, his voice strained but remarkably devoid of panic. He kept his face turned to the side to avoid swallowing the oily rainwater pooling on the road. "You're cutting off my circulation." "Shut your mouth," Jenkins sneered, grabbing the chain of the handcuffs and hauling Levi upright by his bound arms. The pain shot through Levi's shoulders like liquid fire, but he swallowed a groan, getting his feet under him to prevent his rotator cuffs from tearing. They slammed him against the side of the cruiser. Riggs, breathing heavily as if he had just run a marathon, began to aggressively pat down Levi's pockets. He pulled out Levi's cell phone, a set of keys, and finally, his leather wallet. Riggs opened the wallet, shining his recovered flashlight on it. "Got his ID, Brad?" "Who do we have the pleasure of locking up tonight?" Jenkins asked, leaning against the cruiser, clearly flush with the adrenaline of the unprovoked assault. "Levi. Harrison," Riggs read from the driver's license. He didn't look at the other cards in the wallet. If he had looked behind the driver's license, he would have seen the gold, sunburst shield of a captain of the state police. But Riggs just shoved the ID back into the leather fold and tossed the wallet onto the dashboard of the cruiser. "Well, Mr. Harrison, you're under arrest for assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and failure to comply with a lawful order. You picked the wrong night to act tough," Jenkins said, grabbing Levi by the hood of his sweatshirt and shoving his head down, forcing him violently into the cramped, plastic-lined back seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut, plunging Levi into a claustrophobic cage of darkness, smelling of vomit and heavy disinfectant. Outside, he could see Jenkins and Riggs through the rain-streaked window. They were laughing. Jenkins clapped Riggs on the shoulder, pointing back at Levi's Taurus. "Call a tow for his piece of crap car," Levi heard Jenkins say faintly through the glass. "Impound it." Levi shifted in the hard plastic seat, trying to relieve the agonizing pressure on his wrists. Blood was already beginning to drip down his hands, making his fingers slick. His ribs throbbed with every breath, and his spine ached where Jenkins had dropped his knee. He closed his eyes, taking deep, measured breaths to manage the pain. He didn't feel fear. He felt an icy, terrifying rage. For 20 years he had worn the uniform with pride, striving to protect the vulnerable. Tonight, he was the vulnerable. He was experiencing firsthand the terror that so many citizens felt when confronted by the monsters hiding behind a badge. The cruiser doors opened, and Jenkins and Riggs climbed into the front seats, bringing a blast of cold air and the smell of wet wool with them. "All right, tough guy," Jenkins said, glancing at Levi in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with malicious glee. "Welcome to the 42nd. We're going to have a lot of fun with you." Levi looked back at him in the mirror, his expression completely unreadable. "I'm sure," Levi said softly, his voice carrying a dark, heavy promise. "We'll see exactly how the 42nd operates." Jenkins laughed, putting the cruiser in drive. "Oh, you'll see. You're going to see up close and personal." The drive to the 42nd precinct took less than 15 minutes, but in the back of the cruiser, with his hands losing feeling and his shoulder joints screaming, it felt like an eternity. Levi spent the time meticulously memorizing every detail of the interaction. He noted the time of the stop, the badge numbers on Jenkins and Riggs's uniforms, the exact phrasing of the illegal commands, and the specific points of physical impact. He was building a mental dossier, constructing the internal affairs complaint, chapter by chapter. The cruiser turned down a grim, pothole-riddled street, pulling into the gated rear lot of a brutalist concrete building that looked more like a fortress than a community police station. The neon blue sign reading 42nd Precinct flickered erratically through the torrential downpour. Jenkins parked the car near the heavy steel rear entrance. He got out, walking around to the back door, yanking it open. "Out!" Jenkins barked. Levi awkwardly slid his legs out, the tight cuffs making it incredibly difficult to balance without the use of his arms. As he stood, he swayed slightly. Jenkins, seizing the opportunity to show dominance, grabbed him roughly by the bicep. "Don't even think about making a run for it," Jenkins growled, shoving Levi forward toward the steel door. Riggs scanned a keycard, and the heavy door buzzed open, revealing a bleak, fluorescent-lit hallway with scuffed linoleum floors and peeling cream-colored paint. The sounds of the precinct hit Levi instantly. The hum of the harsh lighting, the distant ringing of a telephone, the chatter of police radios. It was the soundtrack of his entire adult life. But tonight, he was entering the theater from the wrong stage door. Jenkins marched him down the corridor, keeping a tight, painful grip on Levi's arm. They passed the locker rooms, the break room, and finally entered the main booking area. It was a large, open room with a raised wooden desk at the far end, behind which the shift sergeant presided over the chaotic realm of the graveyard shift. To the left was a row of holding cells, concrete boxes with iron bars. To the right were fingerprinting stations and processing computers. A few officers were milling about, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups, their uniforms rumpled. They looked up as Jenkins paraded his prisoner into the room. "Look what the cat dragged in," called out an officer leaning against the wall, a half-eaten donut in his hand. "Jenkins bagging them early tonight." "This one thought he was a lawyer," Jenkins announced loudly, puffing out his chest, clearly playing to the audience. "Refused to step out of the vehicle, took a swing at me." Levi said nothing. He kept his head held high, his gaze sweeping the room. He noted the officer's lax posture, the casual disregard for the prisoner's well-being, the fact that no one questioned Jenkins's highly improbable story of an unarmed, middle-aged man randomly swinging at two armed officers during a traffic stop. They approached the high wooden desk, Sitting behind it was Desk Sergeant William Miller. Miller was an older man, nearing retirement, with a thick grey moustache and heavy bags under his eyes. He looked up from a stack of incident reports, his expression one of sheer exhaustion. "What have we got, Jenkins?" Miller asked, rubbing his temples. "Resisting arrest, assault on a police officer, failure to comply," Jenkins listed off, slapping Levi's leather wallet onto the high desk. "He put up a fight, Sarge. Had to take him to the ground." Sergeant Miller sighed, pulling a blank booking sheet toward him. He reached out and opened Levi's wallet to pull the driver's license for the paperwork. "Name?" Miller asked, not looking at Levi, just staring at the license. "Levi Harrison," Levi answered, his voice clear and commanding, carrying across the booking room. The acoustics of the room made the deep resonance of his voice bounce off the concrete walls. It was a voice used to giving orders, not taking them. A few officers stopped talking. The tone of his voice was completely incongruous with his situation. Suspects usually yelled, cried, cursed, or mumbled. They rarely spoke with the crisp, authoritative diction of a ranking officer. Miller wrote down the name. He looked at the address on the license. D.O.B., October 12th, 1977. Miller kept writing. "All right, Jenkins, take him to cell 3. I'll get the fingerprint tech over in a minute. We need to process this." Miller's voice trailed off. While holding the wallet, his thumb had slipped, pushing the driver's license slightly to the side. Behind the plastic sleeve, catching the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, was a piece of solid gold metal. Miller blinked. He adjusted his reading glasses. He pulled the leather fold closer to his face. He used his index finger to slide the driver's license completely out of the way. There it was. A gleaming, perfectly polished gold shield. In the center, the state seal. Above it, etched in stark black lettering, Captain. And below it, Levi Harrison. Sergeant Miller stopped breathing. His heart did a strange, violent flutter in his chest. He slowly lifted his eyes from the wallet, looking past the raised wooden desk, down at the man standing in handcuffs. He looked at the soaked grey hoodie, the mud stains on the jeans. He looked at the man's bruised cheek, the blood dripping from his tightly bound wrists onto the linoleum floor. Finally, he looked at Levi's face. Levi was staring right back at him. His dark eyes were calm, intelligent, and utterly lethal. He gave the desk sergeant a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Miller's mind raced. He remembered the memo that had come down from Deputy Chief Callahan just that afternoon. The memo about the new precinct commander starting tomorrow. The commander who was transferring in from the 14th District to clean up the 42nd. A Captain Levi Harrison. A cold sweat broke out across Miller's forehead. The room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. "Sarge?" Jenkins asked, leaning against the desk, oblivious. "You good? Need me to put him in the cage?" Miller didn't answer Jenkins. He couldn't. His vocal cords were paralyzed. He slowly stood up from his chair, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the wooden desk. The booking room, sensing the sudden shift in the desk sergeant's demeanor, fell completely silent. The hum of the lights was suddenly deafening. "Jenkins," Sergeant Miller croaked, his voice cracking, sounding like a man who had just seen a ghost. Who did you say this is?" "Levi Harrison," Jenkins said, looking confused. "Like I said, he's a nobody who thought he could fight a cop." Miller swallowed hard, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, locked on to Levi. "Officer Jenkins," Levi spoke up, his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room like a scalpel. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "I believe the sergeant is asking who I really am, and I suggest you take these handcuffs off me right now, before I decide to charge you with kidnapping." The silence in the booking room of the 42nd Precinct was absolute. The background noise, the ringing phones, the static of the police scanners, the low murmur of officers chatting, seemed to be sucked out of the room, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating vacuum. Every eye was locked on the desk. Sergeant William Miller stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the leather wallet containing the gold shield. He looked from the badge to the bruised, bleeding man in handcuffs, and back to the badge, the color completely drained from Miller's face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen grey. "Jenkins," Miller whispered. The word barely made it past his lips. He cleared his throat, trying to find a voice that wasn't shaking. "Jenkins, take the cuffs off." Officer Bradley Jenkins scowled, his thick brow furrowing in confusion. He shifted his weight, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. "What?" "Sarge," he swung at me. "He's non-compliant. We haven't even searched him for contraband yet." "I said, take the damn cuffs off him," Miller roared, the sudden explosion of volume making several officers in the room flinch. Miller pointed a trembling finger at Levi. "Right now, Jenkins. You uncuff him right this second." Jenkins blinked, startled by the desk sergeant's outburst. He looked at Riggs, who was already backing away, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Jenkins unclipped his keys from his belt with deliberate slowness, a defiant smirk playing on his lips. He thought Miller was just getting soft, intimidated by a suspect who spoke well. "Whatever you say, Sarge. But when he swings again, it's on you," Jenkins muttered, stepping behind Levi. He grabbed the chain of the handcuffs, roughly yanking Levi's arms up one last time, a final, petty display of dominance, before shoving the key into the lock. The ratchet clicked, and the heavy steel cuffs fell away. Levi didn't rub his wrists immediately. He didn't massage his shoulders. He stood perfectly still, allowing the blood to rush painfully back into his numb hands. The deep, purple-red grooves cut into his skin were visible to everyone in the room. Blood trickled down his palm, dropping onto the scuffed linoleum floor with quiet, rhythmic taps. Slowly, deliberately, Levi turned around to face Jenkins. The height difference was negligible, but in that moment, Levi seemed to tower over the patrolman. The calmness in Levi's eyes had vanished, replaced by an intense, searing authority that pinned Jenkins to the spot. "Sergeant Miller," Levi said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. He extended his right hand, ignoring the blood. "My wallet." Miller scrambled to grab the leather fold, practically throwing himself over the high wooden desk to hand it down. Yes, Captain. Here, sir. I am so sorry, Captain Harrison." The word hit the room like a concussive blast. "Captain." Jenkins froze. The smirk melted off his face, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His brain struggled to process the data. The man he had just dragged out of a car, slammed against a roof, kneed in the spine, and mocked for the last 30 minutes, wasn't a civilian. He wasn't a nobody. "Captain," Jenkins breathed out, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. He took a stumbling step backward. No, that's impossible. You're driving a beat-up Taurus." Levi flipped the wallet open, holding the gold shield up so the fluorescent lights caught the metal perfectly. He held it right in front of Jenkins's face. "I am Captain Levi Harrison," Levi announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the booking room. "As of 0800 hours tomorrow morning, I am the commanding officer of the 42nd Precinct. But seeing as I am currently standing in my own booking area, bleeding onto the floor, I am assuming command effective immediately." Officer Riggs let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He retreated until his back hit the concrete wall, looking like he wanted to sink through the floorboards. "Sir, Jenkins stammered, his bravado entirely evaporated. His eyes darted around the room, looking for support from the other officers, but they had all averted their gaze. No one was going to step into the blast radius of a precinct commander who had just been brutalized by his own men. "Captain, I didn't know. You didn't identify yourself. You were in plain clothes." "Are you suggesting, Officer Jenkins," Levi interrupted, his tone dangerously soft, "that your unprovoked violence, your excessive use of force, and your blatant disregard for civil rights would have been perfectly acceptable if I were a civilian?" "No, sir, but you were weaving. You resisted," Jenkins said, his voice pitching up in panic. He was grasping at straws, trying to reconstruct the lie he had built on the highway. "Do not lie to me in my own precinct," Levi snapped, the command cracking like a whip. "I was driving 55 miles per hour in the center lane. You initiated a stop without probable cause. You issued an unlawful order. You assaulted me, battered me, and filed a false verbal report to your desk sergeant." Levi turned his attention to the desk. "Sergeant Miller." "Yes, Captain." Miller stood at rigid attention. "Relieve Officer Jenkins and Officer Riggs of their duty belts, their weapons and their badges, immediately." "You can't do that!" Jenkins shouted, panic finally overriding his shock. "I'm Union. You need a rep. You can't just strip my badge because you're mad about a lawful stop." Levi stepped closer to Jenkins, invading his personal space, forcing the larger man to look down into eyes that held absolutely no mercy. "You are currently under criminal investigation for felony assault under the color of authority, kidnapping, and official misconduct," Levi stated, detailing the charges with surgical precision. "You are stripped of police powers. If you refuse to hand over your weapon, Sergeant Miller will sound the alarm, and I will have the rest of this shift subdue you and place you in a holding cell. The choice is yours, Bradley. Hand it over, or find out how tight we can ratchet the cuffs on you." 10 minutes later, the dynamic of the 42nd Precinct had been irrevocably shattered. Levi sat in the expansive, glass-walled captain's office overlooking the bullpen. The room smelled of old cigars and stale air, the lingering ghosts of the previous, corrupt administration. Levi hadn't bothered to turn on the main overhead lights, relying only on the small desk lamp that cast long, dramatic shadows across the walls. A precinct medic had just finished cleaning the gash on his cheek and wrapping his wrists in sterile gauze. Levi dismissed him with a nod and picked up the heavy landline phone on the desk. He dialed a direct, unlisted number. It was picked up on the second ring. "Callahan," a gruff voice answered, thick with sleep. "Chief, it's Harrison," Levi said, his voice steady. "I know it's 3 a.m. I need internal affairs at the 42nd immediately. Send Lieutenant Groff." There was a pause on the line. The sleep instantly vanished from Deputy Chief Callahan's voice. "Levi, your shift doesn't start for another 5 hours. What the hell happened?" "I was pulled over on I-9 by Unit 42 Bravo, Officers Jenkins and Riggs. They initiated an illegal stop, dragged me from my vehicle, assaulted me, and brought me in on fabricated charges of resisting arrest." A string of vicious curses erupted from the other end of the line. "Are you injured?" "Bruised ribs, lacerations to the wrists, contusion on my cheek. I'm fine," Levi replied clinically. "But I have them disarmed and sequestered in interrogation rooms 1 and 2. I want Groff here to handle the formal criminal processing. We are doing this by the book. It's going to be a bloodbath, Robert." "Nail them to the wall, Levi. Groff is on his way." Levi hung up the phone. He stood up, wincing slightly as the pain in his lower back flared, and walked out of the office. He bypassed the booking area and headed straight down the sterile, windowless hallway that led to the interrogation rooms. He opened the door to room 1. Officer Bradley Jenkins sat at the bolted-down metal table. Stripped of his gun belt, his radio, and his badge, he looked surprisingly small. The dark blue uniform suddenly looked like a costume he had no right to wear. He looked up as Levi entered, a mixture of rage and terror brewing in his eyes. Levi didn't sit down. He leaned against the heavy steel door, crossing his arms over his chest, his bandaged wrists stark against his dark hoodie. "My union rep is on the way," Jenkins sneered, trying to muster a fraction of his former bravado. "You set me up. You intentionally didn't identify yourself to entrap me. Entrapment requires me to induce you to commit a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit," Levi replied calmly. "I didn't induce you to do anything, Bradley. I simply existed on a highway at 2 a.m. You chose to pull me over. You chose to escalate. You chose to put your knee into my spine. It was a dark road. You matched the description of a—" "Stop," Levi commanded, holding up a hand. "Save the boilerplate defense for your lawyer. You're going to need it. Because right now, you think this is just my word against yours. You think your partner is going to back up your story." Jenkins swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Riggs is a solid cop. He saw you resist." Levi let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "Thomas Riggs is currently in room 2, crying his eyes out to Sergeant Miller. He is writing a fully detailed, sworn statement outlining exactly how you ordered the stop because you were bored, how you fabricated the lane weaving, and how you instructed him to lie on the arrest report." Jenkins's face went chalk white. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. He wouldn't. He already did. He knows his only chance of avoiding hard time in a state penitentiary is to turn state's evidence against you. Levi pushed off the door, walking slowly toward the table. "But it gets worse for you, Bradley." Levi reached into his pocket and pulled out his recovered cell phone. He tapped the screen a few times and set it face up on the metal table, sliding it toward Jenkins. "You didn't search me thoroughly before you threw me against the roof of my car," Levi said quietly. "If you had, you would have noticed my phone was already in my hand. My thumb had already hit the record button on the voice memo app the moment your lights flipped on." Jenkins stared at the phone as if it were a live grenade. "It captured everything," Levi continued, his voice dripping with finality. "It captured you refusing to state probable cause. It captured me complying. It captured the exact sound of you tearing me out of the car and your fabricated shouts of 'stop resisting' while I was completely silent and compliant. The audio is crystal clear. It's already been uploaded to a secure cloud server. Karma had arrived, and it was absolute. The reality of the situation crushed down on Jenkins, suffocating him. His career wasn't just over, it was being incinerated. He was looking at years in prison. The pension he had worked 15 years for was gone. The respect he commanded through fear was vaporized. "Please," Jenkins whispered, his voice cracking. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic pleading of a broken bully. "Captain, please, I have a family. I have 2 kids. Don't do this. I'll resign. I'll walk away today. Quietly. Just lose the audio." Levi looked at the man, begging at his feet. He felt no triumph. He felt only a deep, profound disgust for the system that had allowed a man like this to wear a badge for so long. "Think about the people you've sat in this exact room, Bradley," Levi said, his tone icy and unrelenting. "The people who begged you for mercy, the people whose lives you ruined because you felt untouchable. Did you think about their families when you were tightening the cuffs?" Levi picked up his phone and slid it back into his pocket. "You don't get to resign quietly. You don't get a pension. You are a criminal, and you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Levi turned his back on Jenkins and grabbed the door handle. "Lieutenant Groff is here to formally charge you. When he's done, you will be placed in a holding cell. General population." As Levi opened the door to leave, Jenkins buried his face in his hands, a loud, desperate sob echoing off the concrete walls of the interrogation room. The predator had finally become the prey. At 0800 hours sharp, the morning roll call room of the 42nd Precinct was a powder keg. Word had spread through the department grapevine with the speed of a wildfire. Cops from the graveyard shift had stayed over, leaning against the walls, while the incoming day shift sat in the rows of plastic chairs, their usual pre-shift banter entirely absent. The air was thick with tension, rumor, and a palpable sense of dread. Everyone knew something catastrophic had happened involving Jenkins and Riggs, but the details were fragmented and wild. The heavy oak door at the front of the room swung open. The low murmur of whispers died instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence. Captain Levi Harrison walked into the room. He was no longer wearing the soaked, muddy clothes from the night before. He was dressed in his Class A uniform, the dark navy fabric impeccably pressed, the brass buttons polished to a mirror shine. The gold captain's bars gleamed on his collar. But it wasn't the uniform that drew the eyes of the 70 officers in the room. It was the stark white gauze wrapped tightly around his wrists, slightly visible beneath his cuffs, and the dark, angry purple bruising swelling along his right cheekbone. Livy walked to the wooden podium at the front of the room. He didn't carry a clipboard. He didn't look at any notes. He placed his hands firmly on the edges of the podium and let his gaze sweep across the room, making direct eye contact with as many officers as possible. "Good morning," Levi said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that demanded absolute attention. "For those who have not yet had the pleasure of meeting me, I am Captain Levi Harrison. I am your new commanding officer." No one moved. No one breathed. "I am sure you have heard the rumors regarding the events of early this morning," Levi continued, his tone devoid of any theatrical anger, which made it all the more terrifying. "Let me dispel the rumors and give you the facts. Last night, I was pulled over within the borders of this district by Unit 42 Bravo. I was subjected to an illegal traffic stop, unlawfully ordered from my vehicle, and physically assaulted. I was handcuffed, brought into this station, and booked on fabricated charges." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room like a lead blanket. Several officers in the front row swallowed hard, averting their eyes. Officers Bradley Jenkins and Thomas Riggs are currently sitting in holding cells at the county jail, awaiting arraignment on charges of felony assault, kidnapping, official misconduct, and filing false reports, Levi stated. "They have been stripped of their police powers. They are not on administrative leave. They are terminated, and they are going to prison." From the back of the room, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache stood up. It was Frank Rossi, the precinct's union representative. "Captain, with all due respect, the union has not been formally—" "Sit down, Rossi," Levi snapped, his voice cracking through the room like a gunshot. "You will get your formal paperwork from the district attorney's office, and if you attempt to obstruct this investigation or rally a blue wall of silence around those two criminals, I will personally see to it that the Department of Justice names you as a co-conspirator in a federal civil rights probe. Sit down." Rossi blinked, his face flushing red, but he slowly sank back into his chair. The absolute authority radiating from the podium was unassailable. "There is a disease in this house," Levi said, his voice dropping back to a lethal calm. "A culture of impunity, brutality, and corruption that has been allowed to fester for far too long. Jenkins thought he owned the streets. He thought the badge was a license to terrorize the people he swore an oath to protect. He was wrong, and if there is anyone else in this room who shares his philosophy, I strongly suggest you leave your badge on my desk before the end of your shift today." because if I catch you violating the rights of a citizen, I will not just fire you. I will hunt you down. I will build an airtight case, and I will put you in handcuffs myself." Levi stepped out from behind the podium. Effective immediately, all use of force reports from the last 5 years are being audited by an outside task force from Internal Affairs, led by Lieutenant Groff. We are reviewing every complaint, every arrest, and every piece of dashcam footage associated with this precinct. The era of the 42nd operating as an autonomous gang is over. From this second forward, you are police officers. You will act with integrity, you will respect the Constitution, and you will treat the people of this city with the dignity they deserve. If you cannot do that, you are my enemy." The silence in the room was deafening. Levi had just declared war on the darkest elements of his own command, and he had done it with the absolute certainty of a man who held all the cards. "Dismissed," Levi ordered. As the officers filed out, their faces pale and their heads bowed, Levi knew the hardest part was just beginning. But the purge had started. What the rank and file didn't know yet was the twist that had emerged during the early morning hours. Thomas Riggs, terrified of spending his life behind bars, hadn't just confessed to the assault on the highway. He had cracked completely. Desperate for a plea deal, Riggs had directed IA investigators to a false bottom in Jenkins's station locker. Inside, they found a black leather ledger, a burn book. Jenkins hadn't just been a bully, he was running a highly organized extortion ring. The ledger detailed thousands of dollars in cash seized illegally from suspects and never logged into evidence, alongside a list of local businesses paying him protection money. The rot wasn't just physical, it was deeply financial. Jenkins was looking at federal RICO charges. The wheels of justice are notoriously slow, but when they are fueled by undeniable evidence and the wrath of a high-ranking police official, they move with devastating precision. 6 months after the night on the rain-slicked highway, the trial of Bradley Jenkins became a media circus. The audio recording from Levi's phone, leaked to the press by an anonymous source within the DA's office, had played on a continuous loop on every major news network. The sound of Jenkins yelling, "Stop resisting," while a silent, compliant man was battered against a car roof, became the definitive symbol of police corruption. The karma hitting Jenkins was absolute and multi-directional. The revelation of his extortion ledger opened the floodgates. Dozens of victims came forward. To ensure civil justice was served, the victims retained the services of real-life prominent civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who filed a massive, multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit against the city and Jenkins personally. In his opening press conference, Attorney Crump specifically praised Captain Levi Harrison, stating, "It is a rare and profound day when the hero who exposes the systemic corruption is the precinct commander himself. Captain Harrison is the blueprint for the future of American law enforcement." Jenkins' life completely unraveled. When the federal extortion charges were added to the state assault charges, his defense attorney urged him to take a plea. But Jenkins's ego, though battered, pushed him to trial. It was a fatal miscalculation. During the trial, the prosecution systematically dismantled him. The star witness was Thomas Riggs. Riggs, having accepted a deal that stripped him of his badge forever and slapped him with 5 years of probation, sat on the stand and wept as he detailed the horrific culture Jenkins had enforced. Riggs painted a picture of a monster who took pleasure in inflicting pain and ruining lives. When Captain Levi Harrison took the stand, the courtroom fell dead silent. He didn't speak with vengeance. He spoke with the cold, clinical precision of an expert witness. He detailed the biomechanics of the assault, the illegality of the stop, and the exact moment Jenkins had dropped his knee into his spine. Levi's quiet dignity completely overshadowed Jenkins, who sat at the defense table, looking bloated, exhausted, and utterly defeated. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the judge handed down the sentence, there was no mercy. Citing Jenkins' abuse of public trust, the judge sentenced him to 14 years in a maximum security state penitentiary. The hardest hit of karma came during Jenkins' processing. Because he was a convicted former police officer, he could not be placed in general population. He would be killed within an hour by the very men he had falsely imprisoned. Instead, Jenkins was placed in administrative segregation. Solitary confinement. For 23 hours a day, he would sit in a concrete box, identical in size to the holding cells he used to throw innocent people into, left with nothing but the echoing memories of the lives he had destroyed. His wife filed for divorce the day after the verdict, taking full custody of their children and moving out of state to escape the stigma of his name. As for the 42nd Precinct, the transformation was arduous but profound. Captain Levi Harrison fired 12 more officers over the next year, utilizing the IA audits to root out the remaining corruption. He replaced them with young, educated, and community-oriented rookies. He instituted mandatory de-escalation training, opened the precinct doors for weekly town hall meetings with the residents of Oakhaven, and established a zero-tolerance policy for excessive force. A year after the incident on the highway, Levi was driving home. It was late, raining heavily, and he was in his trusty Ford Taurus. He passed the exact spot on Interstate 9 where his life had intersected with Jenkins. He glanced in his rearview mirror. There were no flashing lights. There was only the steady glow of the street lamps cutting through the darkness, illuminating a road that was, finally, just a little bit safer for everyone. Levi smiled softly, turned the jazz music up on his radio, and drove on into the night. The story of Captain Levi Harrison and the brutal reality check delivered to Bradley Jenkins is a powerful reminder that absolute power corrupts absolutely, but true integrity is unbreakable. Jenkins thought his badge was a shield that made him untouchable, allowing him to prey on the vulnerable. But karma has a funny way of leveling the playing field, and justice, when wielded by someone who truly respects it, hits harder than a baton ever could. The takedown of a corrupt cop by his own undercover commander is not just a tale of revenge. It's a masterclass in accountability and systemic reform. If this story of justice, karma, and the fight against corruption resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends to keep the conversation about accountability alive, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories of karma, twists, and dramatic justice. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Captain Harrison's shoes.